Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we'd love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the English singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist. It is the one and only Tymon Dogg, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Has had a exciting and interesting solo career. In fact, his 1982 album Battle of Wheels is going to be coming out on Tiny Global Records, and this is going to also feature a bonus album of 6 studio and 7 live tracks. That, as I said, I'll put in the notes below. Has also worked with lots of people, including Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, the Moody Blues, Paul McCartney and Joe Strummer, and he knew members of the Clash and all that kind of exciting stuff. Anyway, look, this is the interview. You're going to find out everything and much more. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was really the early formative years, the musical awakening. Anyway, Tymon, this is over to you.
Let me think now. I was very aware of music as a child, you know. I mean, I remember learning all the words of El Paso. I think it was by Marty Robbins. I wasn't sure who'd sang it, but I still learned all the words. I don't. Have you ever heard of it? It's a cowboy song.
No, I haven't actually.
No, it's very lyrical, and I suppose when I look back, I think of learning that at about 6 or 7, and I was very aware of the people like the Everly Brothers, you know, with the kind of harmonies and some of the way that Kathy's Clown, things like that.
Yes.
So I suppose, but obviously by the time I was born in 1950.
Yes.
So by the time the Beatles got into their stride, I'd be about the same age as you were when David Bowie sort of hit the scene.
Yes, this is very true. Actually, you were that perfect age. It's a bit like, is it the Philip Larkin poem about 19? Well, the 60s started in 63 with Lady Chatterley's Lover and the first Beatles album, something like that. So the decades don't completely.
I didn't know that line. That's that Philip Larkin line, is it?
Yes, dear old Philip Larkin. He always had a good way with, and it was kind of true, wasn't it? You know, a decade doesn't really start exactly on the O. It often has a few years to get going before you get a sense of it. So the 60s is definitely. So you would have been 13 in 63, which was a informative period. Were your parents at all kind of artistic, musical, creative?
Not really, but my dad was always like getting instruments and leaving. Like he got me a guitar at 6, you know, because he was a commercial traveller and he was selling drugs. I mean, to pharmaceutical drugs.
Right.
Chemist. But he one time he called me in because one of the lads had a guitar, you know, a teenager, and we sat and listened to him. This was somebody he was selling something to. And I think he noticed my interest, so he got me a guitar. Well, like I say, he got me I was about 6, right? And also then he got piano, and I said, well, it was out of tune, and he got another one, you know. So he was doing that all the time. And then, as soon as I started playing a bit, I said, well, I can't remember if I wrote something. The tape recorder would appear, you know. So I look back and I think, oh, you know, that was really nice that he did that, because he wasn't getting much, you know. I was trying to work out what that tape recorder must have cost him to get that, you know.
Yes.
And I worked out it was the best part of $1,000, you know.
Wow.
In today's money.
Yes, that was a lot, wasn't it, really?
So I suppose he wasn't musical, but he had incredible. He knew something was happening there. He knew there was some freedom there.
Yes.
I mean, you know, because he was like a Dunkirk veteran. He was, you know, been doing all that Second World War stuff. So by 1950, he knew we couldn't go back there. And I think this was a great influence on the people. Each generation has a thing that they particularly have. It's difficult now. I was talking to somebody recently. She was about, she was about 21 or something. And I said, it's kind of difficult for your generation, you know, because it's like what's Randy Newman. He said people ask how you get into the showbiz, and he said it's a bit like people asking you how to break into a bank that's already been robbed.
Yes. Yes. And I think with each generation, you think, oh, they're going to try and probably, I don't know, follow. But then they go on a completely different path and things that they're kind of interested in. You think, oh, no, I'm not at all aware of that. I think...
Yeah, well, maybe I'm not aware of something really amazing happening. I mean, I go out, I don't mind. I mean, I have great faith in humanity. So, and I know that no matter how good anybody is, they don't hang around past about 100. So I know that's what the game is. These days with AI, so you can sort of say, oh, you know, write us a song about this. None of my songs have been written by AI, but I mean, I'm amazed at what comes out. You know, me and my wife were, a few months ago, we were going like, sort of write a song about being stood up. You know, I was amazed at how it will do that, and of course, a lot of people will not want to have anything to do with it. But there's always going to be somebody lazy enough, just like auto-tuning, okay? So instead of singing in tune, you get the engineer to put your voice in tune, put it in time, you know?
Yes.
So you can sing out of tune, out of time, and there you are.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
and they'll do it for you live.
I know.
So, I mean, so how so you can always say, oh, well, that's missing something doing that. But then if you don't know what's missing, are you missing anything? So it's hard. But I go back to, I mean, my personal music, right, is basically folk music. You know, that's what. So because it just went back to that, to somebody just getting an instrument and expressing themselves.
Yes,
that was what I saw the whole rock music as. I saw David Bowie as that too.
Yeah, well, he had a very folk influence to begin with, and also he was into a lot of quite avant-garde bands and artists and performance artists. I knew somebody who was the daughter of Bruce Lacey, who used to do these kind of interesting sort of performance pieces, rituals at fairs and festivals, and his daughter said that David Bowie would come along to some of these in the sort of late 60s, and was kind of fascinated with that world. And also I think there was people like...
I mean, well, I think everybody knew that, because we were used to something we didn't know coming around the corner. So we had to have an open mind.
Yes, absolutely.
And we still have that. And we're waiting for something that sort of knocks us off our chair a little bit, you know, because no matter how old you are, you still like to be knocked off your chair by something.
Yes, this is true.
And also, if you did witness certain things happening, but I mean, I used to be down the Cavern, you know, when I was 14, 15, and I didn't really, you know, it was difficult to be able to see really what was going on. And you're saying, oh, that was a good age to be, but by the time I'd done certain things, I was only, say, 16 or 17, I wasn't capable at that age to be able to put it into context.
What does that mean? What do you mean context?
Well, say by the time I was 23, I could put certain things into context of how much work that you've done to keep your own focus going, to keep yourself on your own rail. I mean, you know why you are instinctively doing things. But when you're very young, you sort of don't understand the games going on. And you certainly don't understand the business side of anything.
No.
You don't realize that it is called the music business. You know what I mean? And now sometimes the music becomes a very small part of the music business.
Yes.
Sometimes the music is massive and the business is non-existent. You know what I mean? And you get that sort of ideology, that balance going on. But the survival of something takes quite a lot to keep going.
Yes, I think you have to be quite smart as certain artists and people. You can see it from people like, I suppose, from the 60s, people like the Rolling Stones kind of got their act together, not quickly, but they eventually got there and understood the business. And bands like U2 in the 80s certainly understood the business and keeping it together and probably being quite practical, as if it was...
Yeah, I think they also realised, I don't know about the Rolling Stones so much, but certainly some of the bands from the 80s started sharing out the songwriting royalties, because that's where so much of the money comes from. And if you've got like one guy in the band, becoming a millionaire, and the rest sort of on like, you know what I mean, just a wage or something, or just a little tiny bit, it becomes really unfair. And also, when a song is recorded, people and the guitar player or somebody might do something. There's a lot for that song.
Yes.
And if they're not, properly credited for what they've done, I mean, the Kinks are a good example of that. I mean, some of the things Dave Davis was doing on his guitar were phenomenal. You know what I mean? It was, and yet, the rock song was written by Ray Davis. I do think that's great. But I think the bands of the 80s seem to realise, look, if we want to keep the band going, we can't have like a class system in the place. You know what I mean? Some people millionaires and other people like just getting by.
Yeah, well, I think that's still the case with people like Mick Ronson, who was with Bowie for quite a few years. I mean, without him, he wouldn't have had that early success and possibly any other success doing what he'd been.
I did work with Mick. We did. I don't know. Do you remember that Ian Hunter record called Short Back and Side?
Yes, I do.
Well, there's a song there called China. I'm playing on that, and I'm playing on, I think, something else. All records don't never die, and because Mick Jones was producing it with Mick Ronson. And I was in the studio, and I kept saying, "Who did that? And who did that?" And they'd always go, "Oh, Mick, that's Mick. Who's playing that piano? Mick." So, and when we went off and worked on China, he wanted me to play some viola, but he was great. He was great, Mick, because he didn't. What I felt from him was he never just took it that whatever happened, there was always a mystery in it. So he didn't take it for granted that he knew what was going to happen, and that would be it. For instance, when we came in after working on this, we were in another part of the studio, and they said, "Is it any good?" And Mick went, "I don't know. We've just done it." And Ian was like, "Oh, for God's sake, we can't, But I knew exactly where Mick Ronson was coming from.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, one time I met him before that, and he said he'd been writing something. He'd been writing some words or something. And I said, "What about?" And he said, "I don't know." And I just sort of, he was a lovely bloke and sort of just so kind of, I don't know, he just sort of was like letting the music take him.
I guess it would be very... I mean, I've done a few interviews with people like, as an example, Chris Spedding, who performed on so many artists and bands and classic songs that we know, like the Harry Nilsson one, I Can't Live If Living Is Without You.
Yeah,
and I said, when you were in the studio and you did that recording, did you think it was going to be amazing? He said, no, not at all. The songs that you think are amazing aren't, or they just get forgotten. And the ones that you think, well, that was all right, a bit of a knockoff, and it just becomes this kind of classic, if you're lucky, that is. So
that is. I mean, I've not been around many things like that, but a few things, and they're always like you don't think they're that good. Well, you just think they're all right.
Yes, and then one day you think, that just captured the moment, really, didn't it? Yeah, well, and I think
I stay with my guns. No, they're still just all right. I mean, I don't think massive. This is the problem. Sort of massive acclaim doesn't always equal how great something is, but at the same time, it doesn't mean everything the majority of people seem to be affected by and thinks great, or a lot of people do. It can still be brilliant as well. So I think they're both sort of little corners that you can't get in. because something is very uncommercial doesn't mean it's good.
No.
And something that's very commercial doesn't make it bad.
No, this is true.
It's intrinsically what it is as a piece of work.
Well,
and also how the people are doing something.
Yes. And I think on that point, it's always interesting. Every 5 years, someone tries to make a documentary, on the music, and they get, to make that classic song. What is what makes it a classic song that we'll remember for years and years? So they'll get a fantastic producer in, the kind of the new kind of whiz person, like, I don't know, Mark Ronson. Then they'll get these amazing musicians, amazing studio singers. They get the writers of the time, and they put it all together. And then you watch this documentary, and they get to the end. They play that song that they've been working on. They've got all the ingredients. They've all got this amazing CV, and you think, God, this is the most boring song I've ever heard. It's functional. It is functional.
Well, are you glad or are you disappointed? I bet you're glad, knowing you.
Yes.
From what I've heard, I listened to your radio show with Stuart Lee on it, and I sort of could get the gist, because it's an interesting side. I mean, there was some Smiths on there was some REM, and it's a sort of area of music, right, of rock music, which is not sort of seen so much. For instance, someone like the Byrds. Take the Byrds as a band that was around when I was in my 15, okay? And some of the stuff they did, but where that sort of goes into the future, where something that was heavy and relatively grotesque sort of it knew where it was going towards heavy metal. And some of that, and that was like Hendrix and stuff. But it's harder to define that very subtle, melodic, and sort of slightly whimsical, and which I always had a great deal of. I had a soft spot for that,
Yes, I always liked, and I think John Peel had the same attitude, that you enjoy listening to people playing instruments that they seemed like they weren't quite in control of them, but they could have kind of just rein them back just at that moment that they needed to, and bring it back to something. But it was out of control, and you can see when a band or artist they're doing that classic period of their life. And then years later, they try and do it again, but the stars don't quite line up, do they? That energy isn't quite there again. And it's like, people have moments, don't they? And I think with people like Hendrix and possibly the Byrds and the Smiths were my favourite band in the 80s, one of them.
Well,
and again, they the ingredients all came together, and there was something magical. But now, I mean, they wouldn't, for various reasons, got back together and said, look, you've got 6 months to make this album again. The disappointment would be enormous, wouldn't it? Because you think, well, it doesn't have it, does it? It's just not got that magic.
I think that fear was probably one of the reasons the Clash never went back together. It was a fear for Joe that because when they did their albums, they were just sort of, just feeling around, just doing more or less. Yeah, they were by Sound and Instrument, they were doing like anything. I mean, I remember I was in New York at the time. I was there on my own trip, and that's when I got involved. But I remember seeing this steel drum guy playing Bach and stuff, because the buskers were very high standard, incredible, yes. And I think they'd sort of grab him in to do a track or something. So it was sort of like, if it moved, get it. They just knew that they had to just open their heads to everything.
Yes, this is true, and that was yes, and obviously side 6, is still one of those kind of uncharted territory.
One of them was a piece of music backwards, which was going a bit too far. He's putting a 7-minute piece of music that was another song backwards.
Yes.
And I went in and said, that sounds like that's something about England backwards. And he went, oh, you're the first person who's noticed. I said, Well, I was playing on it, and I'm hearing my violin coming out backwards.
Yeah, and I do remember. I think it was a member of a band like Darts who were. I think they were neighbours, or they sort of just stumbled upon Mick Jones probably, and sort of appeared on one of the Clash albums. But again, that kind of moment.
Darts.
Darts.
The band with Bob Fishing, because he was a very good friend of mine till he just died last year. That's the same band, is it?
Yeah, I think it was Darts.
They were like a doo-wop band, weren't they?
Yeah, one of those bands that you thought, really? That's amazing. I know Mick Jones also did a kind of work with a member, the woman who sung with Meatloaf as well, which I must admit.
Oh, Ellen Foley.
Yes, I think
I worked on her album with Mick.
Yeah, okay.
That was all part of the Ian Hunter, Mick Ronson trip.
Right.
Because I think she might have been managed by, is it Tony DeFries or somebody? Yeah. She was involved anyway with some of those people, and then she got involved with Mick Jones.
Yes.
And when the Clash were going big, they met various people, and Mick did a whole album with Ellen. I don't know if you ever heard it, did you?
I listened to bits of it.
It was called something St. Louis.
Yes, I think it was one of those ones.
No?
I would have come across it because I did this interview with her recently when she was putting an album out of new material, but it wasn't quite that amazing. So
I haven't seen her for years. I mean, really back. You're talking about the early '80s.
Yes.
And she came to a gig of mine with Mick, and they she wanted to get as many of my songs on her album. She got 3 of them on, but I thought it was okay. You know, it was okay, but I just knew that I'd been working on a thing for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And you know, it was different than other people's. You know, obviously because I realised that was very important. But when somebody said, "Well, let's do," and I thought, well, the point of this, if it changes, you know what I mean? If it changes its sound and that. But I was very grateful to both Mick and her for her, you know, for their enthusiasm and their encouragement of what I was doing. That was in the early '80s in New York.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, look, just before we trundle too far into the '80s, just going back to when you hit 16, which would have been 1966. England won the World Cup, and it was a year before the Summer of Love, which obviously everyone got very excited about. Well, at least 20 people in London. Did you leave school at that point in your life?
Yeah, I left school straight away. I mean, I was I was 15, right? And I went back. I'd already started playing gigs, you know, like I was playing places you might not have heard of them. It was places like Peppermint Lounge. I did a weekly gig there, and I got some gigs at the Cavern. Bob Wooler was still getting people gigs. Bob Wooler was a guy who, and all these basically people who'd still there from when the Beatles had made it.
Yes.
I mean, Bob Wooler was one of their first managers before Epstein. And they were like, at that time, it was there was a strange feeling because the Beatles were so enormous that the idea of this being it's like you go back to somewhere where something has happened and you're sort of working in that, like you work in the same clubs and there might be some other people, like I remember sometimes going somewhere and some of Jerry and the Pacemakers would be there. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But you look back and you realise that it had blown. It was like a balloon that had blown up so quickly. What was your question, David? I'm sorry.
Yes, when you hit you hit 16.
I'm sort of in the Peppermint Lounge.
You were in the Peppermint Lounge, actually. Yes, and the Cavern. Yeah, so you hit.
Somebody Maguire.
You left school at 16. The Summer of Love was kind of literally around the corner, and we were all going to tune in, turn on, and drop out, and go to the 14-hour Technicolor Dream.
Oh, you asked me about school.
Yes.
Well, when I came back after the holidays, and my head had got big, I couldn't get through the school door. I the sort of teachers, and I hadn't had a haircut either. So I was like, enjoying having, the big locks flowing around, And so the headmaster said, come here, and took me into a room. This was a school in Merseyside, Liverpool, something like that. And he said, listen, you either get your hair cut or you go home, right? And so I went back into class, and then a few days later he came in and he said, I told you something, didn't I? And then I said, yeah. He said, you get your hair cut or you go home. And I said, when you put it like that, I think I'll go home. So I just sort of left and never went back.
Right.
So that's it. And so I went back and I sort of carried on doing these little gigs and doing, obviously I had to explain to my parents why I wasn't going to school anymore. So I got a job at doing various things. They were just anything, I ended up in an art studio learning how to screen print. And that was quite good. I quite liked that.
Yes.
And somebody sent off demos of mine or something. And then the next thing is, I don't know if you heard that Bitter Thoughts of Little Jane. It came out in January 1968. It had what's his name? It had two of Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones.
Oh
on it.
yes,
Jimmy Page does a great guitar solo on it, because I'd written that just on the guitar,
Yes.
And that they are really quintessential 60s pieces of music. The Bitter Thoughts of Little Jane is amazing. The way it was recorded, the way it was done. It was a Canadian guy called Jerry Martin who wrote the whole thing out. And I didn't play the guitar on it at all. They just put my voice on it after they'd sort of done all that. They'd done it all on basically 2 tracks.
Yes.
And then they had 2 tracks spare for me to, put some vocals on. And at the time, I was sort of slightly embarrassed about it because it was kind of poppy and then, the way it goes now. But Paul McCartney heard it and wanted to redo it.
Amazing.
He said, I think that's a hit song. And I was like, I'd already done 2 versions, 4 Pi. One with, Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones and these, people on it. People who then became Blue Mink were on it as well. It was a very small scene in the 60s.
I would imagine.
Like I say, if I'd have had a bit more nous and everything, I'd have been able to see what was going on. For instance, like Ireland was setting up, the Ireland, the record
Yes,
company.
Chris Blackmore.
And I was sort of, by that time, I was a bit tired of, I'd gone to Pi and then I was sort of taken somewhere else and recorded. And because I was young, I was 17, and they thought I had commercial potential. But I was just concentrating on the songs and what I was doing, and also trying to develop as a human being.
Yes, it's incredibly young, actually. I mean, at the time you think you know everything, but when you meet a 17-year-old now, you just think, blimey, you are so young. But yes, and fresh face. So obviously you had kind of musical chops at this stage, because Jimmy Page had obviously done lots of session work, hasn't he? It's kind of been...
Yeah, he was on... It's not such a big thing, really. It's just that the record, The Bitter Thoughts of Little Jane, is actually really... for years, I didn't have a copy, didn't want anything to do with it. But now when I hear what they actually did, and they recorded all that in one room, all just going off, and we did 4 songs in 3 hours.
Yes, blimey, that was that's the good old days for you, isn't it? Really, but yeah. So you did. The A side was obviously Bitter Thoughts of Little Jane, and then Ramblin' Boy on the B side.
Yeah, All You Want Is the Ramblin' Boy was on the other side. Ramblin' Boy, I'm thinking surely I could think of something better than that, because it was like the folky kind of thing. Every other song called Ramblin' Boy.
Yes, because it was kind of interesting listening to David Bowie's 60s stuff, because. If it wasn't for his next period, we would have just it would have just become a bit of a cult.
Well, his manager was sitting in the studio when I was recording with Jerry, and he was sitting there with an album I didn't know it was Bowie or Bowie. I saw the picture, and it was that one with Love You Till Tuesday.
Oh, yes.
It was his first manager.
Was it Ken Pitt?
I don't know what his name was, but Jerry said to me, "Oh, this guy's managing this guy, and he's done a record on, was it on DRAM or something like that?"
Yeah, that's right. Yes, and
on Decca or something. And I just thought, because the London scene was very strange in the mid to late 60s, because all this influence was coming in from America, but England didn't know how really to record a singer-songwriter.
Yes.
It was a problem. And I'd go into the studio, and instead of just getting on with it, they sort of wanted to make it sound like the Monkees or something else. And they didn't realise that there was this thing going to happen in the early 70s where obviously Cat Stevens started doing his work a different way.
Yeah.
And there was Neil Young. James Taylor worked on the tracks, was working with Apple, and he came to work on it because he saw when we were sitting around with guitars, he'd just go, "Oh, Tymon's doing his songs, and he'd look at the song, not what we were trying to do with it. And he just loved things for what they were. And when we were in the studio, he'd borrowed John Lennon's white guitar, and he was playing away on it. And then the next song we started, and Peter Asher, who was a good guy and a good producer, and it's really nice that they had me there at all. But he was going like, "Oh, you can't, Timon's going to be a pop singer. James, stop! Don't play the guitar like that." And James got it, threw it in his guitar case. Well, he didn't break it; it was John's, and he storms out, And I was like, but like I say, I didn't have. He had the nous to do that on my session. And then he came round, a few days later, because I was staying in Weymouth Street in Marylebone, and he said, "Oh, have you got the tracks?" And there was something we couldn't listen. He was, and you think, we'd done 3 tracks. We'd done Now She Says She's Young, Something New Every Day, and Who Needs a King. And he said to me, I think you're right about the King song, Who Needs a King? Because I wanted to do that, and the others would go, "Oh, I don't know about that,"
Yes.
But the whole thing about singer-songwriters, I'm sure Bowie was going through these sort of things as well in his own way, but there was no real English way that the Americans, they knew what to do with Tim Buckley, Tim Hardin, Tom Rush. They sort of seemed to know what to add and what to leave.
Yeah.
The English people, the producers, they just didn't get it. They still thought they were recording Vera Lynn.
I guess it was tricky. Yeah, because
they went around it the same way.
I know this is not going to happen, because people like Richie Havens, I suppose, he was quite unknown. Or then you went to the other extreme, which was kind of Burt Yanks and Davy Graham and people like
that was something. But I don't know what year that was happening. I think that was around the similar time, wasn't it? 67.
Yeah, that's right. But did you go to people like Joe Boyd's, I don't know, UFO
Purple Convention?
Did you get into things like the IT, International Times, and Oz, and that kind of counterculture? Was that something that you were aware of and became kind of intrigued by?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And I was very annoyed if like, I think, well, Nick Drake's been recorded as Nick Drake. They're not trying to make him into Herman's Hermit.
No.
So I was sort of, it was probably just, but I can't blame it on anything, because your life is ultimately your dream,
yes.
And things are going on, and you use this at this time, and you just. But the thing is, I'm still making records and I'm still writing songs, and I consider that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to just I wanted to have a life working at the craft of songs and music, and also the mystery is still there.
Yes,
the mystery of music is still there. The mechanics of it, I could work all that out, but without this mystery, which is sort of like the ghost of and the soul of it that is there. And unless that is there, I don't really feel it's music. I feel music is this bridge between the seen and unseen.
Yes.
Between the heard and the unheard.
I know, the magical place. It's the magical moments.
And if we take that out of it and just make it into a sort of like, oh, we're making a chair, and we put 4 legs on it, and so. But even a chair, a chair can have some soul. I mean, there's a difference between a well-made, a sort of a chair that's made with love and a chair that's just made. It might as well be anything,
That's right. So as when the 60s finished, it was a bit of a downer, wasn't it? There was the death of Hendrix Morrison, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Brian Jones had died the year before. There was obviously quite a lot of casualties at this stage, and also we'd had Altamont, and things got a bit messy. What was it like for you? Because you were sort of 20 at this stage. The new decade had come along, and people, as we mentioned, David Bowie had sort of fudged around with a bit of Anthony Newley, a bit of folk. Didn't really work. He went into a different world, especially with Angie Bowie appearing and Tony DeFries and Mick Ronson, obviously. What about your own direction as the 70s progressed?
Yeah, well, I went on this just a nationwide tour, with the Moody Blues, because the Moody Blues were on the tailcoats of the Beatles. They'd also built their own thing, they'd done Tales of Future. Lost Chord was one, and they'd had a fair amount of success, and they were putting in LPs at number ones.
Yes,
in the charts. They had about 2 or 3 of them. And I was being recorded by Justin Hayward, and it was good. And I knew this thing was coming around the corner. I knew that the Neil Young, James Taylor, who had sort of disappeared after he'd been in Apple, but he was about to arise again after his album that he did in America, and Carole King and all that sort of singer-songwriter thing was ready to come from mostly America. But I knew this cynicism. I felt the cynicism, the fact that it wasn't the hippie dream could only roll on somebody's wallet, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
It couldn't really work that well. And then I left the whole thing and went off with a bunch of students, and one of them being Joe Strummer.
Right.
And he wasn't really he was into music, but he didn't play anything or anything. And I liked the freedom of the way these people were who weren't in the music business, because everything I'd done from about 15 to 20 was all around this thing of trying to get this so-called hit, which I actually didn't want to hit, that I would be scared to play to my friends. You know what I mean? That was the thing. I thought, well, okay, you can't be unknown, you can't make nothing. And that's why I took up busking for a while, because I thought this will be a freedom. I took up the violin, which I didn't play, but I thought I'll use this time to practice.
Yes.
And develop something new, because developing something new was the buzz for me, and it still is. Yes. Developing new things is for me still the magic of not knowing quite how or why you did something.
Yeah. And did you feel also at that stage that you were, on that point, not completely alone, seeing people like there was Keith Christmas on one side, experimenting?
Keith Christmas, yeah. I did a gig with Keith Christmas, yeah.
And there was kind of Nick Drake as well, sort of. With
Nick Drake, I never did a gig with Nick Drake, but I was very aware of his stuff, Pink Moon and various other things he was doing.
Yes. I
think he was very carefully handled, but I think, did Joe Boyd do some of his stuff?
He produced him for quite a few of his albums, if not all of them.
Yeah. I think without a producer like that, I think just the average singer-songwriter, you need a producer that really gets what you're doing and works out a way of keeping you happy and the record company. But if you've got if you don't have that middleman,
yes,
it's like producers like that are like midwives.
Yeah, your guiding light, really, aren't they?
Well, yeah, they really they know when things aren't going to work because they know your sensitivities are going to make you dig in your heels or even just run away like I did, just disappear.
I know. But then so you met Joe at that stage. Was that kind of 70, did you say you were in London?
71.
71, so that was kind of... So was this your squatting period in London?
No, not really. It was before that. We were all trying to get £25, which was the rent for a house. We were all chipping in.
Right.
And I just went there to, somebody invited me to basically sleep on a floor. And at the same time, I was like doing radio things for Radio 1, sound of the 70s. So I'd be on the radio. But I still wasn't sure whether, by that time, I knew that if you like the average person or the person that had been treated like a fool, I knew they had a lot more vision and a lot more sincerity. And I didn't think the business, particularly in England, was giving them the respect they deserved. So I was more bothered when I did something that the friends I had were gonna think it was okay than anything else.
Yes.
So when I was on the radio, I was like, really kind of thinking, oh God, they're listening to it.
Yes, this could be. Yeah.
But to some extent, they were kind of like pretty impressed there. If you're on Radio 1, they were thinking, because there were some nice. Bob Harris used to run a nice show there, and he was very open to people. He was very open to my work, and he'd say, "Oh, Time, have you written a new song? Do you want to do it?" And he'd just put it on the radio, and that was fantastic. But that was rare. Let's put it that way. It was very rare.
And what about John Peel? Did he?
John Peel didn't have much to do with John Peel. He didn't like the Moody Blues, and I think he thought because I'd done a tour with them. Because he gave me a lift once. He picked me up on the road when I was hitchhiking up to Liverpool, and John had his own agenda, and then he got into the Slits, and I was living with them, in a house. And so he was like, I don't know, I think he thought I was just going around having this really great time. And he thought, he was always said, every 6 time out having drinking with Joe Strummer, having a good time. But I'm not, I'm just driving home. I respected him and everything, but I don't know what his trip was really, because the problem was that he was like the valve of the BBC. And if you didn't get the go-ahead from him, it was very hard to get any other sort of outlet.
Yes.
Because he became the only outlet. And although it was very good, and he did a great job, I don't want to sort of just knock him about it, but because he did that, he sort of, and he had prejudices. This is the thing, like, he had prejudices, and he sometimes... those prejudices were not sort of. I mean, when give you an example. When what do you call him, Mark Bolan?
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, yeah.
He started out on the. I don't know, if it was on the Dandelion label, but he was a big mate of John Peel, and he used to go and do gig songs with him. And then when T-Rex took off, Tony Visconti producing those records, and that. He kind of was sort of like a bit down on Mark, you know what I mean?
Yes, there was a lot of...
And I don't know whether this was just a paper, this Evening Standard, but when he died, he said, "What did he say?" "Well, he was already dead, as far as I was concerned," something like that. And I just thought, look, what is this crap, you know?
Yeah, I know that was.
I mean, the guy's got a son, he's got his wife, and also Mark has got he's on this, that, and the other. It's not time to be bitter about something, whatever it was. I don't know, but John was a complex guy. He was a complex man, and like I said, I spent a few hours driving in a car with him, and he was upset about this and he's upset about that. And when I look back and I thought, I should have just gone with him wherever he was going, you know.
Yes.
Because he was annoyed that nobody wanted to go to where he was going to Mother's in Birmingham, and he was annoyed that nobody had wanted to come with him.
Yeah.
And really, that's just what I'm talking about, David. If you have more nous, if I had more nous, I'd have gone, okay, I'll come with you, John, and sort of got on some of the gigs, you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. No,
but I didn't. I just said, I'm doing the Albert Hall with the Moody Blues, and jumped out the car.
Yes, that must have gone down terribly.
And also, I was grateful that he stopped he was actually in a Volkswagen camper van thing.
Right.
So I was very grateful he stopped it to pick me up, you know?
Yes. So look, as we trundled happily through the 70s, you know, you got to the mid-70s, and people like, I did an interview with Richard Strange from the Doctors of Madness.
Oh, yeah, I know Richard.
And he said that when he came along, he was like 2 years too early for punk, but everybody in the audience kind of became, you know, like part of the punk scene. And then you obviously, when you brought your first album out, which was self-titled on Outlaw Records, this was 76.
Yes.
Were you were still sort of very much still sort of focusing on sort of the acoustic kind of soundscapes at this stage, weren't you?
Yes. I had very little to do. And that album, I had the idea of that album when I was going to the Albert Hall to support the Moody Blues in 1969.
Yes.
And I wanted to do an album with Shawms and that. And I got a 4-track, before the TIAC was around. I got an Ampex 4-track. I knew a guy had one, and we took it up to my room. But I didn't know anything about compression and reverb and real recording. So it's a peculiar album. I'm not sure I can hear it. I'm never sure that I can hear anything once I've done it.
Yes, I think this is probably true of most people who write, I don't know, books or, yes, academics, people, or just want to hear themselves. I know Neil Young would say that was it. I think Woody Allen sort of said the same about his film. So I think you just sort of, you're so embroiled in it, it would just be too much. So when that came out, did you tour it at all? Did you
No, the thing was, David, when I did that album, I'd sort of gone through this thing from the late 60s, my first gig in London that I can remember doing was in the Albert Hall, right?
Yes.
To 6,000 people, where I was doing a solo set before the Moody Blues came on. And I was very well received, partly because they wanted to encourage this poor guy on his own. I was only 19, but I was 19, which I felt quite old by that time. And so coming from that, right, and then doing some busking and traveling through Europe. I went to Berlin and I worked quite a lot there.
Yes.
Because you could go to that town in 1973, for instance, and there was 3 clubs in the centre of Berlin, and you'd go in and it was like an open mic, and the guys would get out their diary immediately and put you in so many gigs for so I remember one was called the Folk Pub, one was called the Steve Club, and one was called the Go-In. So I do remember those 3 clubs.
Yeah.
And they get out the things, and you could put like 3 gigs in one night. So you'd only be doing half-hour sets.
Yeah.
So they would just they might have a guy singing to a double bass. I remember there's another guy called Mohammed who did a whole concert just on one Persian tabla.
Yeah.
And it was so entertaining that he could do it, and so he'd be doing it. So the town was really creative, and that was great for me because I could develop a new thing while I was learning to sing and play with the violin.
Yes.
And I learned to do that. lose his skin from standing is that I learned to do that by having these 3 places to go and do. Sometimes I'd do 1 of them or 2 of them. Sometimes it would be 3 of them. And I did that for a month. So by the time I came back, and they were really encouraging. The German people were really so kind of encouraging. They keep me on the stage, so I'd have to keep trying to work out new songs.
Yes, that's yeah. And did you? I mean, there were quite a lot of people like Simon Fisher, Turner, and Colin Lloyd Tucker. Did these people come into your kind of orbit at all?
I didn't know them, but the name they sound familiar to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, it could be my memory, but there were so many people still on, on that. It was a folk thing, right? Because the folk clubs were relatively vibrant.
Yes.
And if you get a good folk club, say Les Cousins in Earls Court, or there was a Half Moon in Putney had quite a big thing, and they could get a fair crowd in. It might, even if there was only 20 people or 5 or whatever, or it could go up to 60 or 100 people. But there was this whole thing where you go around. I remember seeing Elvis because he was calling himself D.P. Costello. So I did a few things, and he'd get up and play some songs as well. And I just remember thinking, oh, that's kind of Reed edge,
Yes.
I felt like I was coming more from the folky thing.
Yeah.
And I felt he was coming from the more the sort of. I just thought, it's kind of like a Louis Reed edge he's got.
Yes, absolutely. So you always seemed to sort of attract, especially during the 70s. You were sort of sharing the house with Joe Strummer and then members of the Slits, not the Splits.
Yeah, well, they were, 2 of them. One of them was going out with Mick Jones and one of them was going out with Joe Strummer.
Oh.
And just after they split, the girls they thought they'd have a go as well. And it was... they were already friends, They were already friends of mine.
God. So did the sort of the punk scene kind of interest you, or were you just kind of also just, I don't know, it just breezed by?
I remember going around to 101, the 101ers were
Oh, yes.
Before. And I took this song I'd written called Fuck Off You Bastard. Mm-hmm. And I remember I woke Joe up about 12:30 at night. And... I woke him up, I was surprised he was asleep, And he came into the kitchen and said, I want you to hear this song, Joe. I said, I think this would be good for you and your band because you playing like Route 66 and this rock and roll thing. Because they were trying to be like Dr. Feelgood.
Yes.
Because they were the big London bands, that were doing well. And I wrote this song and I don't know, he took it slightly personal, fuck off you bastard. But I said, this will get you noticed, this sort of thing. And this was like maybe 74, 75. It was before punk had got off. And he said, I think it's got too many chords. We'd never manage them, I mean, I only had about 4. But knowing him, he was very diplomatic. He probably just thought, I don't want to sing that. But, so I was like pushing. I knew what was punk was already happening, say, in the corner of the Stonehenge Festival.
Oh,
There'd be
yes.
somebody with a guitar playing basically punk songs.
Yeah. Were you attracted to the festival scene with you mentioned Windsor, the Windsor Free Festival with Wally
I
Hunt.
didn't actually go to that one.
But did you go to Stonehenge?
I didn't go to it.
Did you go to...
I was sitting at it because I'd been given a grand piano, right, from Sutherland Brothers and Quiver, who were across the road from where I was. It wasn't really a squat. Everything around us became a squat. But we had some sort of deal with a housing co-op, and we only had to find very little money, and we had to do up the place a bit and all that.
Yes.
But from that, the house next door, we squatted that, and we started squatting on these places, and 101 became one of those houses.
Right.
101 Walston Road.
Yes. My God, that's amazing, isn't it? So as we trucked into the 80s, obviously 79, Thatcher is, elected. And then we have there's the Falkland War, the miners' strike, Greenham Common. We all thought we were going to be nuked. And then you were coming out with your next album, which is Battle of Wills, which has been
Battle of Wills, yeah,
reissued very recently. This was on Dick O'Dell's wide label, wasn't it? So
yeah.
So was this an album that you had started writing in the 70s, or was this kind of...
Yeah, some of the songs from Battle of Wills were from the late 70s, Once You Know. I don't know how familiar you are with it.
I have been listening to it.
Have you?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well done.
Yes, I know. Safeway people,
no, I mean,
we
I
love
don't mean
that.
that patronising, but I'm saying it's not an album. I meet many people who've listened to it. And I was very pleased with it at the time, to be honest, because I had this sort of sound and getting tablas used. And I was trying to keep away from the sort of straitjacket of the way, bass drums and guitars and everything.
Yes.
So I was just trying to move away from that. And I'd obviously been inspired by people like, I'd heard what the Incredible String Band had done, and what various other people had done in that sort of scene. And I wanted to sort of work with that. And I was very interested in the texture of some of the Indian instruments, the sarangi, and even there was no sarangi on there. And I was very interested in the way the tablas could hold something together, like a bass and drum sound.
Yeah.
And the guy, I went round and trying with loads of tabla players, people who'd worked with Pentangle and various other people in the pop rock world had tabla player. And I couldn't get it to work with them. And then I went to the Bavan. It was a place in New Oxford Street, and it was the very traditional Indian place. And I got a number of this guy called Mishra, M. Mishra, and he'd sort of worked with Ravi Shankar. He was the most kind of classical teacher. And I went around to his house. I think he was living in somewhere like Southall or something like that. I went around there, and I started up a song, and he just rocked off immediately. I mean, he's playing those tablas, right? I don't think there's a click or anything. He even put, the first track, Firefishes.
Yes.
He put those tablas on that violin after the violin was done.
Wow.
I didn't play to his tablas. He played that tabla to my violin that I'd recorded and said, can you play along with this? And there's no click, there's nothing. And off he went. and he could really, I don't know, he could just hold his backbeat. And that's what I was looking for. So we could use the sound of the tabla, but use the way that rock music is approached.
Oh, got you. Yes, absolutely. That's because this release that's just come out, it never got a proper release at the time, did it? It sort of what do you call it? Y Records through Rough Trade got it well. It got relatively well noticed. Got reviewed. I don't think it got any. Oh, John Peel wouldn't have anything to do with it. He really suspected it. I don't know why. Yeah.
But the people in Rough Trade said, I don't know what's going on, but he was like, just, no, I don't want anything to do with that record. So they said, like, we like it more now because we've found something that frees John Peel out.
Nice, that's nice.
And then Joe heard about John Peel's reaction to it, so he then says next week in NME, John Peel's show is like a dog vomiting on your face.
Yes. So with this release, that's just come out on your new label that you're with, aren't you?
Global.
Tiny Global with John. This is going to have quite a few. It's got seven 7 other songs, hasn't it, that have been unavailable? These have been
There's
recorded.
some taken from a gig I did in New York, because I turned up in New York in the early 80s. Oh, fantastic year. I mean, if anybody young, I always say just go and do something, and develop. Don't wait you're not in school anymore. The thing is, this college mentality, this X Factor type thing, you just get out there and get a survival way. Get some way of just getting some gigs, or you're doing street shows or something to develop. Because New York was like that. It was still hanging on to this this romanticism of like Gerd's Folk City. There was the Bitter End, and then there was a lot of other gigs. I did the same as I did in Berlin. I went round each one of them. Some nights I'd do 3 auditions.
Did you play places like, I don't know, Max's Kansas City or CBGB's?
Yeah, I did there with CBGB's. Yeah, I was doing everything. If I saw a light on behind I had some really funny times, I did a gig once, believe it or not. I did a gig and it was with Quentin Crisp, right? So Quentin Crisp and me were a double bill. He was at the top of the bill, obviously, so I went on before Quentin Crisp. But there was things like that happening all the time. Another gig I was doing was Leonard Bernstein's daughter had a band of some, and he was there. And I went on after her, and he was so drunk by the time I came on, right? I just remember his 2 legs and arms flailing around, shouting, "And I'm the Beatles!" And they were carrying him out the door. Leonard Bernstein. And, I think that's New York, 1980, golden year. The town was incredible.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's a very interesting, I think with their sort of post-punk period, there was a lot more kind of African rhythms in the music, because there was a label called Z Records, and there was also kind of avant-garde jazz as well, wasn't there? Because there was bands like the Bush Tetras, and then there's James Chance and the Contortions. And when you listen to those kind of releases, there's got very strong sort of rhythm guitar or very good percussion that had sort of African influences, and just lyrically as well, they were a little bit more abstract than what the UK was doing at times. So
yeah, there was some nice things going on, and there was also lofts. There was lofts that there was one called Arlene's.
Yeah,
and she'd put on so many shows, so many people. So say she'd come to a gig and see you on it and say, "Oh, will you do this on Thursday? Come on, play, half an hour or whatever." And then she'd have something else. It could be a fire eater coming on. It was, and I just loved it, and the people who you meet, like Giorgio Gomelski. Do you know who he is? He was he was a sort of institution of New York, and he came up to me after I played in Arlene's, said, "Oh, would you like to do 4? I've got put on 4 gigs with Nico. I think you'd go well on that." And Nico, of course, I loved her work, particularly Marble Index and Desert Shore. So she was one person who I really, her and John Cale, I just thought were genius, and I just loved it. So when he said that to me, of course, I jumped at it, and I did the 4 gigs with her, and then accompanied her a bit on the violin. So, but that was New York. That was the vibe in New York. Was
so who was that person? Giorgio
Gomelski. Giorgio Gomelski. I wouldn't completely know how to spell it. Yeah, I know he had something to do with the Yardbirds. He produced the Yardbirds For Your Love.
Yeah.
And he also had something to do with the Rolling Stones. He might have even been like one of their first managers or something.
Yeah, because I know there was a woman called Anna Magnuson. I think her name was. She used to run a club in New York, which became very sort of famous.
Anna
Magnuson. Yeah.
Okay. Well, where was she running her? Was it in an actual club or?
Yeah, she was a sort of. I know she starred in a film with David Bowie as well. I know this is not
Okay.
good. I'll remember it once we finish. But yeah, she was kind of one of those kind of movers and shakers of the kind of.
Yeah, well, I think people still they were sort of the internet wasn't there, so it had to happen either word of mouth or by you doing something.
Yes.
And I still believe that, though. I mean, I know younger people, I meet them and they say that, and I say, just do it, do something. Don't wait for something to happen from your computer or somewhere. Really do something, because you need to work, because that's where you work. You learn your craft.
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
like going on stage and learning how to even get through a bad gig, because you're not going to do every gig good.
Yeah.
You've got to know how to survive everything.
I know, you got to. So she did a club called Club 57 and also the Mud Club as well. I think she was involved
Mud
in.
Club. Yeah, I did Mud Club.
Yeah, and she did.
Yeah, that was good. They were great.
Yeah, and I think she was also in a incredible 13-piece women's band as well in New York as well during that period as well, which I did an interview with one of the members quite recently. I think there was far too many people in one band. It didn't end well, but you could imagine. So when this release came out and it's being reissued, obviously, so what happens next for you in the 80s? How do you navigate that next period?
Well, the year after that, I then went into the studio with Glyn Johns.
Oh my God, he's such a cool dude.
Well, that was and Joe was producing that record.
Right.
He asked Glyn Johns to do this album, which has never been released. And John Henderson of Tiny Global wants to put it out probably next year sometime.
Wow, just pausing on that one. So you did a next album with Glyn Johns. Do you know what it's...
And Joe, yeah.
And Joe. And what that's titled?
Hollowed Out.
Hollowed Out. But we haven't got... But not... So who's got the copy?
Velvet Stella is from that. I don't know if you've ever heard Velvet Stella.
No.
It was on the compilation that Cherry Red put out.
Oh, I'll have to check this out. This is very exciting. Velvet Stella.
Velvet Stella was recorded by Glyn Johns, and it was all done in one room. Not the whole album. Velvet Stella. And me and Glyn Johns, he hadn't really come into... he'd say, "Oh, that's good," and I'd say, "I don't think it is. I think we need to do it again." And he'd say, "Look, he didn't quite say I'm Glyn Johns. You don't know who I am." But there was a little bit I was saying, "Look, it's not. I know what's happening. This is not 1972 anymore.
Right.
We've got to make the rhythm section a bit harder than that to get through." But now, when I listen to it now, I'm really glad. I'm really glad for what Glyn did.
Yes.
Because he was just saying, he's just saying, "Look, it sounds great." And he wasn't quite saying, "If I think it's good, it is good." But he more or less was. And I was sort of going, well, that's not good enough, Glyn, Because then Glyn didn't really have an awful lot to do with the pop world for quite a while.
Yes.
Because I don't think he could make that jump into this mechanical era, like drum machines and computer sort of stuff. He was still, he was a brilliant person who produced brilliant 60s music.
Yes.
But I mean, why would you ever need to be anything else if you're doing that?
I know. And actually, I found quite a few people who have their zeitgeist moment in one period and one decade. Their next period is sometimes it's not quite so there, is it? It's a bit embarrassing.
Well, Glyn didn't want to. He didn't want to leave that. And he was quite right, because he had his strong opinions of how he thought things should be. And he didn't want things to be, as it were, perfect.
Yeah.
He didn't see this is what happened to the Rolling Stones. Like, when he recorded the Rolling Stones, he just recorded them, right? Now, when somebody starts sort of putting Charlie on a click track and changing his snare for something else. I've got all the Rolling Stones albums in one go on CDs once, and I put them on, and then it got to a point where I thought that swing is missing, that natural swing that Charlie and Keith seemed to push along, and we could feel, and we trusted it, and suddenly it's gone.
Yes, I know. There's been a lot of drummers I've interviewed who've had real problems of the click track.
They treated drummers terribly in the 80s.
Yes.
Because they had this machine, this Lindrum, and they say, look, the Lindrum's doing this, and you've gone slightly slow there, you've gone slightly fast there. This new band I'm working with in Spain, David, I hope I'm not going off into a tangent, but...
No, that's fine.
Tymon Dogg and the Decoys. We record, and Richard Dudansky is playing the drums. He was the first one, he was the one-on-one-ers drummer. There was another one on him, but he was the main one. So we go back a long time, and he also played drums on the Glyn John session.
Right. This is amazing. Yes.
And now we're working in a band together in Spain.
That's brilliant. Is this also possibly coming out on Tiny Global?
Yes, it is. John Henderson is putting them all out. Well, so far he's put out that, and he's just got the Granada sessions together.
Nice.
This has got Antonio Arias, Juan Cordonio. These are musicians who work in Spain. They used to work with Enrique Morente, which I know sounds like a long way. He was one of the foremost flamenco singers, but they did this rock thing, and so we've been working together. Antonio writes some of the songs and sings them because he's a relatively well-known artist in Spain, and but we're working very much like 60s teenagers, you know what I mean? We just go in and we start working on ideas, and we just make what we can out of them and record them.
Yes.
And we don't sort of think, and so we've got a record coming out, and I want to get back there quite soon and start a new album of new songs and just keep the thing going.
Yes, absolutely. Which is always, you got to keep it going. But then, is your next album, is this one called Relentless, or did you do an album before?
Relentless. So sorry, I'm shooting. Yes, I did a song after I did
Battle of Wills.
Battle of Wills. Then I did Hollowed Out.
Yes.
Which never got released. Glyn mixed it a bit soft in a way. I wanted to sort of change a few things on it. But then I decided to record an album with just the violin and voice simultaneously with no overdubs. Yeah. And I did 12 tracks like that, and I did 2 sitting at the piano. But I didn't put any vocals on separately.
Yeah.
So what you hear on Relentless is actually happening in a room at the same time. That's it.
Okay, that's amazing. Yes, so very live and direct. Nice.
Well, I was sort of into this sort of stripping things right down to just got the bone of it, and the song had to stand there, and yet the sound, of course, one violin and a voice, just that's it, and then all these songs, and they're not folk songs really. So it was just I wasn't sure I liked it at the end of it because it's a little bit like it's very intense, really. I mean, the lyrics were very intense.
Yes,
they're just really intense. It's intense stuff. It's totally uncompromised, and I'll probably go back. In fact, on the Granada sessions, I do one of the songs from that album. One of Relentless, I've re-recorded it with the band. It's a song called I Don't Want to Be Poor. And that was my feeling about things at the time.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, I like doing what I want, but I didn't like being poor.
No, this is what.
This is really difficult to get those two things together.
I know.
To do exactly what you want, and not have an audience, and sort of still kind of keep going.
So when do you join Joe Strummer's band? When does that begin?
Well, that was in 2000.
Right, so there's quite a big jump there, isn't there?
Oh yeah, I hadn't seen him for about 15 years.
Blimey.
12 years.
Yes, I've got you. So what before then? Before that, are you still putting out? There's a wave of dreams. Is that your next?
Yeah, that came out later. That came out just couple of years ago.
Right.
Because Susan, my wife, is she's translated a lot of surrealist French stuff.
Yes.
Poetry. So she said, would you be interested in doing a soundscape with these? So I did some live soundscapes behind that. And I also I did some songs with my first wife. I only had two. And we did some work at the time in the early 80s, not far from around Battle of Wills. I was working with Malcolm McLaren.
Oh, blimey!
He was, you know Malcolm McLaren.
Yes.
And he was sort of trying to open the thing to a lot of different ways, and he was very interested in all sorts of folk music, and he was a very inspiring person at that time, and so I enjoyed that connection. In fact, some of the tracks I remember finishing once, and calling round to his house at 1 o'clock in the morning, right? He was living just on Marylebone Road. And I went straight round there and went in, because that was the kind of person he was, He'd sort of like, oh, yeah, you come around and say, I want you to hear this, Malcolm. And I'd stick it on, and I said, listen to this tabla. And he'd go, oh, that's good, So it was very creative. And Malcolm could... If you kind of were willing to learn, he could destroy you very quickly, Malcolm.
Right.
And when I started working with a few other people, I could see they found it hard going.
Yes.
Because he just sort of was like, he was like a sort of gremlin, And it was great while things are moving, but there was always that little bit of mischief happening in him.
Yes.
And he wanted you to compete with his mischief. That's the way I saw it,
I could imagine.
And, but he was great. He'd play something and say, I remember this guy, P.O.D. Pete, And so, well, who is he? And he'd be some West Virginian guy, who was doing something from some, I don't know, some of the places in America. And he'd say, and I go, yeah, what is that? And it'd be like, real hillbilly music. He'd go, I like to make this hip.
Nice, very cool.
And the other thing he had, which I'd never heard before, was South African music. He had Soweto music way before Paul Simon did Graceland.
Yes.
He had all that stuff. He'd been to South Africa, and he'd come back with a pile of these records, and they blew me away when I heard them. The whole approach, the way they took on rock music, and the way the bass played, really central. And I remember reading an interview with Paul Simon, and he said when he heard the Soweto music, it was a bit like hearing R&B for the first time, because there was something very special about the way these Soweto musicians were playing this music.
Amazing.
But Malcolm was way on it. When he got there, he said he'd go around looking for the musicians, and some of them would be living like virtual tramps, or they thought, he's been on the bottle for years. You're not going to get much out of him. But he'd take him in. He did do some okay duck rock he did with them. I don't know if you heard that at all.
No, I do remember a couple of his kind of 80s kind of...
Well, he sort of put into... This is typical. Malcolm had some great stuff, and then he didn't know when to stop. So then he got Trevor Horn involved, and you got some New York rapper guys, and it just all tippled over, you know, till he didn't know where it was in the end. I remember he called us in and said, "God, come and listen to the album in the studio," and I went in there and I thought, well, you know, it was like some of it's great and some of it was, what the hell is going on? And then these rappers talking through it and everything, like through the tracks. He was just trying to get everything, like somebody wants a soup with everything in it.
Yes, tricky bit. So was that your next release then, as we trundled on a little bit more, Made of Light? Would have been...
I did that in 2015.
Right, so
that was something I did in my own studio, and that was songs I'd done. And, I was sort of going in, just overdubbing a few things. I had one drummer come in and play on one song. Did you hear that at all, David?
Yes, I've had a listen, and it's been, inspiring. Very nice indeed.
Well, when I hear that, I mean, Time for Moving On was good. I enjoyed that, doing that. Liam played the drums on it. And there's I just do a song, and I just sort of go for it. Of course, because I can play the piano, I can play the guitar, and I can play instruments, and I can put together things by overdubbing a few and being able to play violin and viola and that.
Yes,
I can make it something into quite a record. I'm saying but when I play Made of Light live, just on the guitar, just on the Spanish guitar, I think it's better.
Right.
That's my feeling now. My feeling is, I don't know. I just sort of, I like that sort of thing where the song really stands there, almost not quite on its own, but so I tend to react like that. So after doing a record one way, I sort of feel like now I want to do something a lot more naked.
Nice, that's very good. But before you brought out Made of Light, you'd already joined Joe Strummer at this point, hadn't you?
Well, I did really just one album with him, because I turned up at a gig he was doing, the Poetry Olympics, and I went on stage with him because he actually was just him and the percussionist, and because I had my violin. A year before that, I'd gone somewhere, and I'd made him go off and get a guitar, because it was a friend of ours had died, a bass player who played in the one-on-oneers, and he'd turned up at, I think it was Acklam Hall, and I said, "Aren't you going to play?" And he said, "Well, I haven't got a guitar now." And I said, "Well, I've got my violin." So I said, "We've got to do something. So, you go and get a guitar, and I said to him, I'll compose a song, I'll just do it. We'll do it now. You just can back it."
Yes.
And anyway, once we got going, I looked to the side of me, right? And it was like back when he first started, joining in, and he was belting away. And that was, so next time I saw him, he was saying, "Oh, have you got your violin?" And I said, "Well, I owe you a gig, because, you played last time, at my sort of request." And so I went off and got it, and we played the Poetry Olympics, and I think we played every gig. I don't think he did another one that we didn't do together, because he came off stage, and Martin Carthy, the folk legend, was there as well. And I said to him, I introduced him to Joe, and Joe said, "Would you mind, do you want to join us?" So he said, "Yeah." So we wrote out some chords for him, and I had some chords that he had, because I didn't know what we were going to do. And Lily Allen, the singer,
yes,
she was there with her dad, and I think that was the first performance she ever did, and she was doing backing vocals on a song as well. So that was our first gig at the Mescaleros. A few days later, he called me and said, you want to come down to the studio? And so I went down there, and 5 days later, we had half an album done. 2 days after that, or maybe it was a week after, the Who tour was on, and he said, I'm going to blow out the Who tour so we don't stop. So we just carry on playing, we carry on writing, because we've done a song a day. From scratch, we'd written it, and then he could write the lyrics, and, we were just very creative. We were sleeping in the studio. It was just like, just really great fun.
Yes.
And, you say, I want to blow out the Who tour. And for me, somebody saying, I'm going to blow out sort of, the Docklands and Wembley Arena. And I said, no, Joe. I said, look, I don't think maybe you should blow this tour out. I said, how about this? Instead of just going off, he said, I'm blowing it out because it'll interrupt us working, and they haven't given us enough free tickets. So I said, look, how about this? We go on the tour, but we play all these new songs we've just done. That's it. And we don't play, all the things they expect you. Maybe after about 7 songs, you can do a Rock the Casbah or something. So he sort of mulls it over and then goes, all right, well, we start with, at the time, we had this 21 minute, you ever heard of Mescaleros, but it finishes with a 21-minute doodling around with me on the violin.
Is this Minstrel Boy?
Yes, Minstrel Boy.
Right.
Anyway, this is a story on its own. It says, okay, we'll do that, Tymon, but we'll start with that one.
Excellent.
So I thought, well, I better cut it down a bit. So I said, well, okay, so I sort of cut it down to about 7 minutes so we could do it. There wasn't any singing on it. We did do one with a vocal for Black Hawk Down about a year later. So that was how we developed the Mescaleros, the new Mescaleros, as it were.
Yeah, and this is the album Global A Go-Go, isn't it?
Global A Go-Go was really us revisiting. We did it round the corner from where we used to live. We used to live in Harleston.
Yeah.
In 1970, 71, 72. And the Battery Studio was just down the road in Wilston. And we did the record there. So we were kind of back being sort of late teens, early 20s people, in our heads.
Yes. But then when that album and, that date had gone, or dates, you didn't want to continue with that project?
Who?
With Joe and the Mescaleros. Well,
it was difficult because it got very well received, and we had some big film things taken, from it. And it was very difficult because there was a lot of different energies moving. For instance, most of the other Mescaleros had just come off from working with Robbie Williams.
Right.
Okay? Which in itself, Robbie Williams has done some good stuff, particularly like Feel. But the thing is, the energies was different, and they didn't really know what me and Joe were up to half the time. And then just to give you an example, I find out I went to school with one of their fathers.
Excellent.
So the thing of generations and values and stuff, and it was hard for them because they sometimes thought Joe was wacky and eccentric and really weird, But because he was the boss and he was paying their wages, they'd sort of think, oh well, we can take how weird we think Joe is out on Tymon, and and then Joe would get sort of kind of take umbrage to thinking, who do they think how do they think they're doing things,
Yes.
And then all my work started being the stuff that was making money. It's all the stuff in the film, Mondo Bongo, that Minstrel Boy that, was used for, I think there's some telephone advert used a minute of it. And it's just, I was playing the song, because he wanted to do that with the Clash, Minstrel Boy. And it had gone on for a long time. That was so sort of nearly 20 years later. It crops up again. And we went back to the studio when we were going to leave, and we were sitting in a bar, and he goes, "Oh, let's go back and do it now." I said, "What, 1:30 in the morning?" He said, "Yeah." And the engineer was there, and he went back. He had the drum loop. He knew it was going to be a 3/4, so he put that on, and I just played away on the violin and just tootling around and played the tune for a while and thought, God, I'm bored now. And I went into a whole thing I used to do years ago when I was learning to play the violin, just making up these little tunes in sevenths and stuff like that. I never thought for a second any of it would ever be used.
God, that would be fantastic.
I thought we were just putting off going home. I thought nothing else.
Yes. So then, sort of after that kind of project, then, and obviously we mentioned Made of Light. Have you just always been sort of working on sort of musical projects?
Yes. Right now, I'm working on some new songs I've got, that's yes. I've been doing that since I was about 15.
Yes, absolutely. And have you managed to keep a track of your amazing archive and all the pieces you've done?
No, I think that's why John at Tiny Global, John Henderson, wants to sort of go. He said, "Listen, you know, he wants to sort of get some stuff done." But and I appreciate that. That's really good. And my wife Susan is looking at that. But for me personally, I'm not sort of dragging around sort of a sort of legacy.
Yes.
Not, you know, okay, I don't think it's that much certainly not as a success one, but even as the work, the fact I have survived, and the fact I'm going to do new songs and new record, God willing, I hope.
Yes.
is for me a fantastic. I just really enjoy that sort of thing, and I had a break in my shoulder a couple of months ago. It was just something, I fell on something, and I couldn't play, you know, so I had to sort of not do some things, and I sort of brought it home to me how to be able to do something is such an incredible privilege. But it is fantastic, and doing something is in a way its own reward. Of course, you need some dosh.
Yes.
You need some food, and you need something. I'm not trying to say people who are ambitious. That is very good, and it's sometimes a very good thing if a very ambitious person works with somebody who's a half in the clouds, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, they're a good combination, because if you just have naked ambition, it's pretty horrible. And if you just have, somebody, dreaming away, nothing's going to get done.
No, this is true. It's and probably bad. No editing. We need good editing at times, don't you, really? So
yeah, you're going to have to edit this interview, by the way.
Well, it's
so you're going to have to make this interesting for somebody who, has got a lot to do. They've got a lot. I mean, a person's life has so many options and so many things, and it is such an incredible thing. One of the things I felt very strongly about at some point is wasting anybody's time seemed to be I didn't ever want to do that.
Yes.
I realized that, okay, so you're trying to get a hit record, but is it any good for yourself or anybody else? Okay, you're going to make some money maybe, and you're going to get a big swelled head, but other than that, what else is going to happen? The survival thing was important, and it was very important for Joe as well. Keeping the band going and on the road, the Mescaleros,
yes,
was very important for him at the end. And I was very pleased that I could contribute to those songs, because by that time I'd learned to appreciate about 2 weeks before he died, I said to him, you've written some good lyrics, Joe. And it's the first time I'd ever told him that. And he went, oh, thanks, So I felt a bit like, somebody, because I'd never really I just thought, okay, because I was the one who had the paper bags full of lyrics when he met me.
Yes.
And I was the person who was doing this art form and had been doing it a long time. And he was an artist in the Central School of Art. So he was sort of like working out really how to do that. And it was me who said to him, look, you've got to write some songs for the 101ers. You can't just sing 50s and 60s covers. And he was a bit shocked that he was thinking, what, me write a song? I said, yeah, because he was brilliant with words. He's a great cartoonist and fantastic. He has so many qualities to his character. I just knew there was a lot of things he could do, and then he started writing his songs, and look what he did. He did some great stuff.
Yes, absolutely, stunning. But
some people I meet, they say, I didn't particularly like the Clash, because they liked other bands, but there was a humour and a sort of way of looking at things and ideology that I think the Clash did work with. And it took me a while because at first I thought, they're just trying to make it now. But it took me a while to, appreciate them. It's like Mick once said to me, he said, well, I'm glad I did the Clash because if I hadn't, I might have done something a lot worse.
Yes, that's a good...
Anyway, Dave, listen, I'm sure you're going to have to do a bit of... You've got a big pair of scissors.
Yes. Well, look, this has been phenomenal, and I'm really excited. I've enjoyed listening to all these, a musical kind of journey back in your back catalogue. But the most important thing, you've got new material, which is also more exciting.
It's the future.
Yes, we've got to go for the future, haven't we, really? We're all still so young. But look, have a lovely time, and thank you for this time, for your time for this. This has been amazing.
Thanks, David. I hope I can. I'm interested in your show and what you're actually doing, because from the few things I've heard of the songs and that, it started me thinking, yeah, this is. Rock music has certain things and certain types of things, but the sort of thing that you're doing doesn't really have a clear space, but it's always been there. Like the Who would do their songs, and then there might be something that I'm trying to think of something on Who's Next, or Who Sell Out.
Who Sell Out was definitely the one, which was the...
That there was some song, and it was that kind of... I know these are always like, it's a jangly indie pop thing, but there is something very special about that. And it used to come in sometimes like in the Clash, someone got murdered, or where it's a sort of way that the minors and the majors blend, and the Beatles obviously had a big pile of it.
Yes, absolutely.
But this thing is a particular thing that there is. It can easily get lost because it's quite a subtle thing.
Yes, we love subtle. We love those kind of moments between the obvious. That's always a good. But I think someone's chiming in the background actually with your...
That's my mobile.
It's your mobile. Well, look, and just to make sure, it is Tymon, is it? Tymon, yeah. Tymon Dogg. There you go. But I'll let you rock on for that. And look, thank you.
No, it's gone now.
Oh, it's gone now. Okay. Well,
good, these mobile things.
I know.
They can interrupt you anywhere, anytime.
And so late. Gosh, it's very late.
Anyway, David, look. Anyway, thanks for your work with music. All right.
Yes. Well, we love it, and yes, thank you for your time. And and good luck with this.
Without people like you and John Henderson and people who have such an... do you play any music yourself?
No, unfortunately, that was something that never quite came onto my radar. But
where would we be without the... Where would the voice be without the ear?
Yes, this is true. This is what I say all the time. But look, this is great.
All right.
Take care. Thanks again.
See you, David.
Take care. Cheers. Thank you.
I'm going to follow your shows now.
Yes, and have a listen to some more of my interviews. They're always fun.
Yes,
Okay.
I will do.
Take care.
All
Thanks
right.
a lot. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. You probably guessed. But a massive thank you to Tymon Dogg, also Stephen John Murray, talking about his life in music. And as I mentioned, and I will put this link in the notes below, he has got the album from 1982 available from Tiny Global Records. That is Battle of Wheels, Expanded Edition. It's true. Anyway, this has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. And also, all these have been archived interviews on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.